a little later on. We're back in studio with Rachael Omamo, who is the Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Defense, giving her first televised interview. And let's go straight into some of the major security issues that a lot of people have questions about. Let's start with the KDF troops in Somalia. How much longer will they be there?
Well, KDF is operating in Somalia under the hat of AMISOM. Last year, the United Nations passed a resolution that extended the length of stay in AMISOM up to the last quarter of this year. We operate under AMISOM because we are dealing with the threat in Somalia as a collective. It's important to understand that we did not go to Somalia on holiday. We went to Somalia to protect the interests of our country, to protect our ability to manage our own affairs without a terrorist threat hanging over our heads. We went there to protect our economy. We went there to protect the livelihood of Kenyans. Now, our concern is that we have to ensure that before we leave Somalia, we have left a stabilized country, a country that is in charge of its territory. You see, the thing about the terrorist likes ungoverned spaces, and we're not prepared to have ungoverned spaces in Somalia because that is a threat to our security. So there are two issues that will inform our departure from Somalia. One, whether our own strategic interests, your interests as a Kenyan, is secure. We will also take into account the AMISOM mission itself. And based on that, we will then make a departure from Somalia. But for the time being, our focus is on fighting terrorism in Somalia. We've got to win that war because you and every other Kenyan has to be safe.
And for the Kenyan at home asking, you know, at what price we're getting hit as well, until when? What would you say to that?
Well, you see, we're fighting an unconventional war. We're fighting an enemy that is engaged in asymmetrical warfare, and sometimes that enemy will seek to transfer that warfare to our homeland. As far as we're concerned, KDF's intervention in Somalia is what has allowed this country to move on. If KDF withdraws from Somalia prematurely, then the price will be very heavy. We have in Somalia, because of the threat there that was interfering with the safety of our people. It was allowing for the proliferation of trade in light and small weapons. It was allowing for the smuggling of goods across our country. It was threatening the livelihood of our country. And as a Minister of Defense, and as a ministry that is associated with KDF, it is our responsibility, our constitutional mandate, to ensure that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of this country is secured. And that's why we're in Somalia.
Right, let's now move to South Sudan, where we committed to sending troops to shore up, Kir, which in what is essentially a civil war. Doesn't this amount to taking sides?
Actually, the decision that was made by the National Security Council was in response to a request made by the UN for the country to send about 300 troops to the UN mission in Somalia. They're there to undertake a peacekeeping role and to secure the UN mission there. The situation in Southern Sudan is a situation that should be of concern to all Kenyans. This is a young nation with a young democracy. It is our neighbor. We were involved in the processes of securing peace in South Sudan in the first place. So it is in our interest and in the interest of the region for us to work towards facilitating a peaceful resolution of the crisis in South Sudan. And in this regard, the head of state of this country, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, have been working hand in hand with IGAD to try and find a solution to the crisis.
Okay.
We intend to deal with the South Sudan situation through the IGAD process. We want to see a peaceful resolution to the crisis, and we will work as a community of nations in trying to restore stability to our neighbor.
Okay, let's go back to our borders, which appear to be largely porous, and I stand to be corrected. We had a van carrying very heavy artillery which passed through those very borders. What are we doing to beef up security around our borders?
Well, we are working very hard as KDF to prevent the influx of terrorists into our country. That's why we're in Somalia. We work very hard to do so. But you can't have a soldier on every inch of the border. And so we have to work as a team. We have to work with internal security. We have to work with immigration. We have to work with the people who are manning border posts on our borders. It's not an easy task, but it's a task that we are committed to, and it is a task that we are working very hard towards. But once in a blue moon, you will get somebody passing through the border unnoticed. It doesn't mean that KDF is not doing its work. It's just that our borders are porous, and you can't man every inch of it. But we are working very hard to try and find solutions as to how best to deal with the challenge on our borders. But I would like to say that as Kenyans, we shouldn't lose heart. We shouldn't lose heart in ourselves as a people. We shouldn't lose heart because of the very strong terrorist threat that we're receiving from Somalia. We are working hard to subdue it, and we believe that we will succeed.
Okay.
Yes.
In time. So it's just a matter of Kenyans kind of being patient and allowing the ministry to...
Kenyans should not only be patient, Kenyans must also be vigilant. Okay. Because the fight against terrorism is not going to be won only by security forces. It also requires citizen participation and vigilance from citizens. Okay. And so I encourage Kenyans to be part and parcel of the process of trying to rid ourselves of the terrorist threat.
Okay, one or two more questions before we wind up. And Kithure Kindiki had introduced the Senate bill to build a Homeland Security Department to incorporate KDF and other security agencies to work jointly under that command, under one command. What do you think? Is that a feasible way forward in terms of working under that command?
Well, I think that we have to look at our constitution. The role of KDF is set out very clearly in the constitution, and it's interesting that you're asking this question, whether or not the military should be involved in internal affairs. There are two constitutional provisions that allow that. We were at Westgate because it was a constitutional obligation. And, you know, we are assisting in the police in trying to stabilize the situation in parts of northern Kenya because Parliament approved it under a constitutional mandate. So it seems to me that we, as a country, we must allow people to express themselves, people to engage themselves in this issue of security. But in the end, any structure that is established that encourages coordination between security organs has to speak to the Constitution. And there's no way in which KDF can be under any other command than the President of the Republic and the Chief of Defense Forces. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So we have to think through some of these ideas. I know Kenyans are concerned about the security forces working together, about better coordination. But these ideas that are coming from the Senate, that are coming from ordinary individuals are good, because it means that everyone is concerned, and it means that everybody wants to get on board. And that's what we want to see. We want to see security becoming a priority in this country, and security taking its salient place in our relationships with each other.
Okay. Yeah. How much is the funding for security in Kenya in terms of being able to fight insecurity across the board?
Well, we get a budget allocation every year. we have very many priorities also.
Okay.
We have to think about schools, we have to think about water, we have to think about many things.
Yeah.
We have budget constraints, but within those budget constraints, as the Ministry of Defense, we're trying to do our best to ensure that we fight the threats that are on our borders.
Okay. So for the moment, would you say it's enough? It's not enough?
It's never enough.
It's never enough.
It's never enough. It's never enough in Kenya. It's never enough in the United States.
Yeah.
It's never enough in Uganda, because threats evolve. Threats evolve. And we are glad that His Excellency the President has pronounced himself on the need for the security sector to be better funded, especially the police, KDF, and we are grateful for the funding that we are given. But as far as we are concerned, even within the constraints of our budget, we still have to discharge our responsibilities, because money has to be given to other sectors too.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll leave it at that for now. I thank you again for coming for your first TV interview at Citizen TV. Of course, that's Rachael Omamo, the Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Defense. Thank you very much for joining us.